October of 1942. The Pacific was already swallowing ships. Carriers burned. Fleets disappeared. Entire battles were decided in minutes, and in the middle of that chaos, one American ship kept showing up. Again, and again, and again. The enemy thought they had destroyed it. They were wrong. Its name was USS Enterprise, CV-6. And by that point in the war, it had already become a problem no one could solve. Not because it was the biggest, not because it was untouchable, but because no matter what happened to it, it didn't go down. The Pacific War wasn't forgiving. There were no second chances out there. One bomb could rip through a flight deck. One torpedo could tear open the hull. One mistake, and a ship was gone forever. The ocean didn't care how powerful you were. It only cared if you survived the hit. Enterprise had already seen what that looked like. It had been in the opening phase of the war. It had watched ships burn. It had seen how fast everything could collapse when the enemy struck first. And from that moment on, it adapted. Faster launches, tighter coordination, relentless readiness. This wasn't just a carrier anymore. It was a system that refused to fail. Then came one of its hardest tests. The sky started to fill with dots. At first, they looked small, distant, then bigger, faster. More of them. Enemy aircraft. Dozens. The alarm sounded across the ship. Men ran to their positions. Gunners locked onto targets. Deck crews cleared the runway. Pilots rushed to their planes. There was no confusion, no hesitation. Everyone knew what was coming. The first wave dove out of the clouds, steep, fast, precise. Dive bombers screaming toward the deck. The air exploded with anti-aircraft fire. Shells burst around the incoming planes. Smoke filled the sky. The entire horizon turned into a wall of explosions, but they kept coming. One bomber broke through. It came in low, too fast to track perfectly, too close to stop in time. Impact. The explosion tore into the deck. Fire erupted instantly. The shockwave hit like a hammer, throwing men off their feet, ripping through equipment, sending fragments of metal across the ship. For a split second, everything stopped. This is where most ships were lost. One direct hit, one fire out of control, one moment of chaos, and the ocean would take the rest. But not this one. Even as flames spread across the deck, even as smoke filled the air, the ship kept moving. Damage control teams were already in motion. Hoses deployed. Fire crews pushed forward into burning sections. Wounded sailors were dragged away from the flames. No one waited. No one froze. They moved like they had done this before. Because they had. Above them, the sky was still full of enemy aircraft. The attack wasn't over. Not even close. Another dive, another scream of engines, another bomb falling, explosion. The ship shook again. More damage, more fire, more chaos, and still. Enterprise didn't stop. Its guns kept firing. Its crews kept moving. Its pilots, the ones who had already taken off, were now out there, hunting the very aircraft, trying to sink their ship. This wasn't just defense anymore. This was resistance. From above, the attackers expected to see a ship falling apart, a carrier crippled, a target ready to sink. Instead, they saw something else. A burning ship. That was still fighting. The timing didn't make sense. The damage should have been enough. The fires should have spread faster. The systems should have failed. But they didn't. Every minute the ship stayed afloat made the situation worse for the attackers. Because now, they weren't attacking a dying target. They were attacking something that refused to die. And that changes everything. Because when a ship refuses to sink, it doesn't just survive, it keeps fighting. And Enterprise wasn't done. Not even close. The next wave was already coming. Bigger, more aggressive, more determined to finish the job. This time, they were going to throw everything at it. And what happened next is the reason this ship became a legend. The second wave didn't hesitate. It came faster, lower, more aggressive. This time, they weren't testing defenses. They were finishing the job. From the sky, the carrier below looked wounded. Smoke rising, fires still burning. Sections of the deck damaged. To the attackers, it looked like the end was already happening. All they had to do was push it over the edge. On board USS Enterprise, CV-6, there was no illusion. Every man knew how close they were. Too many hits, too many fires, too much damage in too little time. But no one said it out loud, because saying it would mean accepting it. And they weren't going to accept anything. "More incoming!" The shout cut through the smoke and noise. Heads turned upward. Dots in the sky again. But closer now. Faster. More dangerous. Dive bombers dropped almost vertically. Engines screaming as they committed. This wasn't a probe. This was execution. Anti-aircraft guns erupted again. Barrels glowing. Shells exploding. The sky tearing itself apart trying to stop them. One bomber caught fire. It spiraled down, too late. It had already released its bomb. Impact. The deck exploded again. Fire surged upward, hotter this time, stronger. Metal plates lifted and twisted. Fragments tore across the surface like shrapnel from a grenade the size of a truck. Men were thrown. Some didn't get back up, and still. The ship stayed afloat, but now it was different. This wasn't controlled damage anymore. This was stacking pressure. Layer on layer. Hit after hit. Another bomber broke through. Too low. Too fast. Another explosion. Now systems started to fail. Sections of the ship went dark. Communications flickered. Heat built up in places it shouldn't. This was the point where ships died. Not instantly, but inevitably. Fire spreads. Systems collapse. Crew loses control. And then the ocean finishes the rest. Below deck, damage control teams were running out of time. Water pressure fluctuating, pipes ruptured, smoke choking entire compartments. They kept going anyway. Above them, the attack didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. Now they came from multiple directions. Dive bombers from above, torpedo planes skimming the surface, a coordinated strike. This was the moment designed to break the ship. Torpedo! The warning echoed across the deck. A white trail cut through the water. Straight toward the hull. No time. No maneuver big enough to avoid it cleanly. Impact beneath the surface would mean one thing. Flooding. Loss of balance. End. The crew braced. Seconds stretched. Longer than they should. Then, the torpedo missed. Barely. It passed along the side, detonating further away than intended. The shock still hit the ship. The hull groaned, but it held. Any closer, and it would have been over. Above, the last of the attackers made their final dives. Desperate now, because something was wrong. This ship was still there. Burning. Damaged. Hit multiple times. But not sinking. To the attackers, it stopped making sense. They had done everything right. Perfect approach. Multiple hits, combined attack, and still, no result. Because what they were facing wasn't just steel. It was coordination, training, discipline under pressure. Every fire met with resistance. Every system failure patched or bypassed. Every second bought with effort. The ship wasn't surviving by luck. It was surviving because every man on it refused to let it die. Minutes passed. Then more. And something started to change. The attacks slowed. Not because the mission was complete, but because They had nothing left to throw. The waves had failed, and below them, the ship was still moving, still armed, still operational, still dangerous. The fires were being contained. Damage was stabilizing. Systems, not all, but enough, were coming back online. It shouldn't have been possible. By every expectation, by every calculation, by every previous example in this war, it should have sunk, but it didn't. And that's when the realization hit. This wasn't just a target anymore. This was something else. Something that didn't follow the normal rules of war. And if they couldn't sink it now, when would they ever? Because this wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. The damage was real. The losses were real. The ship was hurt, but it was still alive. And what it would do next is what turned it into a legend. When the attack finally ended, the ocean went quiet again. But on the deck of USS Enterprise, CV-6, there was no peace, only smoke, fire, and exhaustion. The enemy had pulled back, not because they were ordered to, but because there was nothing left to throw that would change the outcome fast enough. They had done everything right. Perfect coordination. Multiple attack waves, direct hits, torpedo runs, and still, the ship didn't sink. Below deck, damage control crews were collapsing into the work, not away from it. Smoke burned their lungs, heat blistered their skin. Metal corridors were twisted and dark, but they kept moving, because stopping wasn't an option. Fire by fire, section by section, system by system, they brought the ship back under control. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to stay alive, enough to keep fighting. And that was the pattern no one could understand. Because this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. The Japanese had already reported it destroyed before, more than once, in separate battles, different attacks, different conditions. Each time, they believed it was gone. Each time, it came back. That's when they started calling it something else. The Gray Ghost. A ship that appeared where it shouldn't. A ship that survived what it shouldn't. A ship that kept returning to battles it should have been removed from. Not because it was invisible, but because it was unstoppable. And every time it returned, the balance of the Pacific shifted again. For American forces, Enterprise wasn't just a carrier. It was a guarantee. If it was in the battle, the fight wasn't over yet, because it had done something no other ship had done consistently at that scale. It absorbed punishment and kept operating. Bombs, near misses, kamikaze attempts, repeated strikes across different battles, and still, it remained in service. Not untouched, not undamaged, but alive when it should have been gone. Years passed in war like that. One engagement after another, each one heavier than the last, each one pushing limits further. And Enterprise kept showing up, always where it mattered most, always when the pressure was highest, always when the outcome was uncertain. Not because it was lucky, but because it was built for a kind of war the enemy never fully adapted to. Air power, coordination, speed, relentless recovery. The enemy could strike, but they couldn't finish it. And that is what broke them psychologically over time. Because war isn't only about destruction, it's about expectation. And they expected it to sink every time. And every time, it didn't. By the end of its service, Enterprise had participated in more major actions than almost any other American carrier of its era. It had been hit. It had burned. It had been declared lost in reports that turned out wrong. And yet, it survived the war. not as a miracle, but as a pattern. Because some ships are built to fight, some are built to survive, and very few are built to do both. Again and again, under conditions that should end them. That is why its legacy stayed, not just in history books, but in memory. Because when people talk about the Pacific War, they don't just talk about battles. They talk about endurance, about pressure, about what refuses to break. And Enterprise became the clearest example of that. Not the biggest ship, not the newest, not the most protected, but the one that refused to disappear. Because in war, there are ships that sink, ships that win, ships that fade into history. And then there are ships like this one, ships that, no matter what hits them, keep coming back. And that's what made it a legend. It didn't just survive the war, it defined what survival meant.